Welcome to a KeySmash Studios tutorial. In this video, we're going to be continuing with our inventory system. This is part 3 of our collection game series. In case you missed the first 2 parts, I'll be sure to provide a link to the playlist for this tutorial in the description below. The first video covered creating a class for our items, and the second video was the first part of our inventory system. As you're watching, if you find this video helpful, please remember to like and subscribe. The first thing we want to do is add some new input mappings, so we're going to go up to Edit, go down to Project Settings, find Input, and we're going to create a new action mapping, and we're going to call this Pickup. And I'm going to map it to my left mouse button. We're also going to create an axis mapping, and this one is going to be called Iterate. And I'm going to map this one to my mouse wheel. We're going to use the action mapping of pickup so that way we can interact with the scene. Whenever we're near an item, we can click the left mouse button and use the pickup action. And then for iterate, this will be tied to our inventory, so that way when we move the mouse wheel, we'll be able to iterate through our inventory and change the current index. For those who don't know, the difference between an action mapping and an axis mapping is the return type. An action mapping returns a boolean. So for instance, for our pickup, I'm going to tie that to pressed, so that way whenever we press the left mouse button, it will return the boolean of true and will know to continue the action. An axis mapping's return type is a range, so in this case with our mouse wheel, this will return a range of either 1 when moving the mouse wheel forward or a -1 when moving the mouse wheel backwards, so that way we can have a range of values to determine whether we want to iterate forward or backwards through our inventory. And now that we've done that, we can go back to the scene. And we're going to open up our My Character script. Again, as I mentioned in the first part, you do not need our character controller for this tutorial, so you'll just add this code into whatever character controller you have. If you are in need of a character controller, we do have a tutorial for this one that I am currently using, and I'll be sure to provide the link in the description for that if you would like to follow that one. But for now, we're just going to go over to our header, and we're going to actually add 2 includes. The first include is going to be for our items, so just item.h, and our second include is going to be for our inventory, and we called this my inventory, and you'll want to put .h. Now we can go ahead and scroll down and create our functions. Our first function is actually going to be for calling our inventory's iterate function, so that way we can take the input inside our character controller and send it to that function inside of our inventory and use our mouse wheel to iterate through our inventory. So this is going to be void. I'm simply going to name it callIterate, and then we want it to have a parameter of float value. Our next function is going to be for figuring out when to add items, so we're just going to call it void callAdd. And inside this function, we're going to determine if the objects within a specific range are in fact items that we want to be able to pick up, and if they are, then we're going to call the add function of our inventory, so that way we can add them to the inventory. Now we can go ahead and create our properties. We're going to have 2. The first one is going to be a reference to our inventory, so that's uMyInventory, and it's a pointer, and I'm just going to call it inventory. And we're going to end up having our inventory as a component on our player, and then we'll use this pointer to hold reference to our inventory, so that way we can call these functions inside of this class. Our final property is going to be for our range, and this is actually going to be a uSphere component, and we're just going to call it range. And we're going to use this range to determine how far an item can be from the player and then still be able to pick it up. And I actually forgot that we're going to need another include, so just go back up into the top, and we're going to include components/sphere component .h, and then that should make this no longer red. And that's all we're going to be doing inside our header, so we can go ahead and go over to our CPP. And the first thing we want to do inside here is create our range, attach it to our player, and then give it a radius. So we'll go ahead and create it, so range equals create default subobject, and the type that we want for this object is a uSphere component, and then we'll just call it for its text collection range. And then we want to make sure that it is center on our player, so we're going to attach the range to our root component. And then finally, we want to give it a radius. So we want to set sphere radius. And I'm going to give it a radius of 100, as I feel that best fits the range that my player should be able to pick up items. However, this number can be whatever best fits your game. From here, we want to go down to our BeginPlay. And inside our BeginPlay, we actually want to assign our inventory reference. So we'll do inventory, and then equals this find component by class. And then the type is going to be uMyInventory. And what this is going to do is take this object, which is my character, search for a component of the class uMyInventory. When it finds the first reference, which will only have one, so this is why this will work. If we had multiple of this instance, we would not want to use this function. But once it finds our inventory component, it'll then send reference of that component to our inventory pointer. And the reason we do this inside BeginPlay instead of inside our constructor like we did with the sphere is because we're referencing our inventory, which is attached separately from this class. And so whenever it goes through the constructor, it may not have actually already been created, and that would create a null pointer, which would cause a lot of issues. So by doing it in BeginPlay, we already know the constructor of the inventory component has been run and that the inventory exists. So now we want to go ahead and go down to our inputs. And we want to go ahead and bind both of the new mappings we created. So we're going to do input component. And we'll start with our action. So we're going to do bind action. And this we named pickup. And that's our mapping name that we put inside our project settings. And then we need to give it the key event, which is when the action will be called. In my case, I'm going to do pressed. So i.e. pressed, as I want the action to only take place when I push down on the button. And then we need to say which object we're binding it to, which is this. And then finally, the function that will be called with this, which is going to be myCharacter call add. And again, what this line is doing is taking our mapping of pickup, which is bound to our left mouse key, checking whenever the action of press takes place, and when this happens, it's calling our function callAdd. So now we want to go ahead and do this for our axis of iterate. So we're going to again do input component. This time it's going to be bind axis. And once again, we want the mapping that we put inside of our project settings. In this case, it's iterate. This one doesn't have a key event, so we just want to say the object that we're binding it to, which is this, and then the function that we want called whenever the axis of iterate is being moved. So again, myCharacter, and in this case, it's going to be callIterate. And this line of code is doing similar to what it's doing above. It's taking the mapping of iterate, binding it to the function of callIterate, so that way anytime we use the axis of iterate, which we've bound to our mouse wheel, the callIterate function is called. Now we can go ahead and actually create these functions. So we'll just scroll down and start with callIterate. So we'll do void myCharacter, and this is callIterate with the parameter of float value. This function is pretty much only going to call our inventory's iterate function, but we want to have a couple checks in place before we do that. So the first thing we want to check is that value exists. And then after we're sure that this parameter of value exists, we want to make sure that our inventory is not null. Checking these are important so we don't get any kind of null errors. So now that we've checked that both of those exist, we want to take our inventory reference and call its iterate function while passing in our value. And that's literally all there is for callIterate. So we can go ahead and go down and create our callAdd function. So again, it's void and myCharacter callAdd, and this one had no parameters. And the first thing, similar to above, that we want to do inside this one is make sure that our inventory is not null. And the reason we're checking so much to make sure our inventory isn't null is because we're calling on its reference. So if it is null and we try to call on the inventory's iterate function or call on the inventory's add item function, if it happens to be null by the time we get to that part of the code, Unreal will crash because of the null error. So by having these checks above our code, if we accidentally forget to attach the inventory to our character, for instance, then this inventory would be null, but we'd never get to the point where it matters and crashes the system. Just nothing would happen because we don't go further than this check. And now what we want to be doing inside this function is checking all of the objects that are in range of our player, seeing if they are in fact part of our item class, and if they are, adding them to our inventory. So the way we're going to start this is by using a t-array of class AA actor, and we're going to call these collection items. From here, what we need to do is fill in this array. So the way we're going to do that is take our range. We're going to check which actors we're currently overlapping with this range. And whatever actors we are overlapping with, we're going to fill into our collection items array. And then what we want to do is create a for loop so we can individually go through each item in this array. So that way we can check if that specific actor is an item, and if it is, we can then add it to our inventory. So again, we want to do a for loop, and we want this for loop to continue while I is less than our collection items.num, which is the total number of items inside that array. And so now we need a way to check if the current actor is an item, and the way we do that is creating a temporary value and attempting to cast to it. So we're going to make an a-item pointer. It's going to be const, and we're going to call it temp item. And then we're going to attempt a cast of a-item to the collection item of index I. In case this line's a little difficult to understand, it's taking the actor of collection items, attempting to cast it as a item class, and if the collection item within range happens to be an item, in other words we can pick it up, then it'll successfully cast into this a-item pointer of temp item. And this is how we're able to tell if an actor that we've interacted with is actually a pick-upable item or if it's just an object in the scene. And so now we need to make sure that it's successfully casted, and the way we do that again is an if statement to make sure it's not null. If temp item is null, then we know that that specific collection item was not a item, and so we don't want to continue further with our code to add the item to the inventory. But we also want to check more than if it's just a item. The next thing that we want to check is that our temp item is not pending a kill. In other words, we weren't already trying to previously pick it up. And then finally, we also want to make sure that this item is active. And the reason it's underlined is because I accidentally put these under private instead of public. So we need to go back and both of these functions and both of these properties are going to need to be inside of public instead of private. So just go ahead and move all 4 of those over there. Get active, touched, name, and amount. Sorry for any confusion that may have caused, but now we can go back to my character and the error is handled. And then we can go ahead and add the item to our inventory if all of these things are true. So we want to take our inventory reference and add item. And we had 2 parameters for this item, the first one being the name of the item and the second one being the amount. So we're going to do temp item name for the first one and temp item amount for the second one. And the next thing we want to do is take temp item and call its touched function. And since this was 2 videos ago, as a reminder, the touched function set it inactive in the scene and set its getActive to false. By doing this, it makes it to where we can no longer pick up the item again. So if you are wanting an item that stays there and you can constantly pick up, then you wouldn't have this touched function added here. And then what I'm going to do, just so you can see that this is working on the screen, is add a debug here. So I'm going to do gengine add on screen debug message. And I'm just going to fill in these parameters real quick. And again, I'm just doing this so that way we can visually see on the screen the item that we've picked up. And now we only have 2 lines of code left, and both of them are debug messages that we're going to use so that way we can see our code working, since we're not doing UI until later in the series. And these 2 lines are actually going to be inside our MyInventory class, so if you go up to your CPP, and then scroll down inside your MyInventory until you find your iterate function, and then just at the end of this function, you're going to add G-engine, add on screen debug messages, and I'm just going to give it the same parameters as the previous one, except for this one I'm going to do the item name that is currently selected. And then I'm going to copy paste this and do the amounts, except the amount is an integer, so I need to make sure to convert. And the way you do that is by putting fstring from int, and then just provide this as its parameter. This should be item amounts. And again, we're just adding these inside our iterate function, so that way we can see the iterate function working before we've created our UI. So now I'm just going to go ahead and go back to the scene and compile. And now that the compile has completed, we can go ahead and go over to our character, and we're going to add the inventory component. I'll just call it my inventory. And now we can save and play. And then if I walk over to this item and click, and it's not working, so give me a second while I try to figure out why it's not working. So I figured out the issue, and there's actually 2. The first one is that I forgot to put a not in front of the temp item is pending kill. We want to make sure that the item in the scene is not already in the process of being destroyed, so you need to make sure to add that not sign in front of the temp item is pending kill. The other one is inside of our inventory script, another if statement. I put a not here, but this is actually supposed to also be equals equals. You want to make sure that the item name is empty and that the first equals does equal -1. So now I'm going to go ahead and save that and compile again. And then we can go ahead and play. And now if I go over here and click it, you can see that the pillar has been picked up. And if I rotate with my mouse wheel through my inventory, you can see that 2 of the slots are empty with a 0. 1 of the slots is 5 with the pillar. So now our inventory and picking up item is successfully set up. As a recap for this specific video, we created 2 new input mappings so that way we could tie the code that we created in the previous version to our character controller to allow us to actually iterate through our inventory and pick up items and add them to our inventory. As always, I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions or suggestions, you can leave them in the comments, or you can join our Discord and ask them there. We post videos here every Wednesday and Saturday, but we also stream on Twitch Monday through Wednesday, so if that would interest you, be sure to check that out. We've also created an app on the Google Play Store called Blastoff, and we have a kids toy asset pack on the Unity store. If any of those things interest you, or you would like to support us in any of those ways, all of the links for those things will be in the description below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you next time.